Welcome to the show, Crazy Wisdom. My guest here is Tricia. Can you introduce yourself?
Hi, thanks for having me. My name is Tricia Martinez, and I'm the founder and CEO of Walla and director of the Dala Foundation.
And what do you guys do at Walla and Dala?
So Walla is a mobile financial platform for emerging market consumers, and Dala is a crypto asset that powers it. So we operate in Africa, and we recognize that there are a number of barriers within the financial ecosystem within emerging markets. So basically, the systems are totally broken. They were never designed around the vast majority of consumers, and the entire system is pretty much disincentivized participation. So we see so many consumers throughout Africa, throughout Asia, throughout South America operating in cash. And you always hear the term unbanked people. We're actually trying to remove the banks. We think that blockchain technology and cryptocurrency is what will really drive the financial revolution and start putting more power back into the hands of consumers in these countries.
That's so interesting. And so many people talk about how the developing world might leapfrog the developed world and become more advanced than in the way the developed world handles certain technologies that happen with cell phones and landlines. Can you explain more about how because I imagine that goes into why you guys started why you started in
Yes.
Africa. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, so 100% Africa specifically, the entire continent leapfrogs technology. So like you said, with landlines and internet, even with mobile financial services. So the funny thing is the US is actually very far behind when it comes to financial technology. Like we're still signing checks in the United States, whereas people in Uganda are sending mobile payments. We're doing that, 10 years ago, and we're even using airtime, which is essentially mobile minutes, as a form of currency. So that's really how the concept of mobile financial services came about, and it's in large part because systems are so broken, they're not designed for these consumers, so people have to create their own systems themselves. So that's why they started using airtime as a form of currency.
And I know that M-Pesa, which was the currency that was pretty popular in Kenya, seemed to have done a revolution there, but then a lot of people complained because in order to take the money out of the M-Pesa network, you had to pay 20%. Do you guys kind of help solve that problem at all, or are you guys?
Yes, so since day one, I started the company like 4.5 years ago, but since day one, we've always had zero fees.
Uh-huh.
The reason why consumers still heavily use cash, so a side note, 94% of transactions in Africa are still conducted in cash. Even with the rise of M-Pesa, proliferation of mobile money, people hate these services because you can pay fees that are between 5 and 100% on a transaction, depending on the size of it. So depositing, withdrawing, sending money in country or cross border, buying products and services, everything comes with a fee. So this entire model, like I said before, really disincentivizes people to participate. So we said, with blockchain technology, we can actually create a new system that incentivizes the behavior we want to see. So remove fees, reward people for doing, great financial behavior, for saving money, for paying off your debt. If you do those things, you get incentivized. So we're using crypto to really, spearhead this financial revolution. But M-Pesa was really one of the first ones in the space to start doing something interesting.
And how is it going so far for you guys?
It's been crazy. So it's been 4.5 years, and we finally just launched a few months ago, which is crazy. Like it just takes so long. These are Africa problems, right? Like it takes so long to build. Things move so much slower. You have to be on the ground to get business done. But so we launched a few months ago and have been blowing up, growing virally. So good problems. In the first few months, we had over 100,000 consumers sign up, download the app, and open up wallets. We have people depositing and spending the cryptocurrency on electricity, on satellite TV services, an array of products. We've processed over 3 million transactions. So it's going in the right direction. Probably in the crypto space, we're one of the most active and furthest along.
Yeah. And that's really interesting. So you guys have started to see growth when everybody else has been talking about, no, there's nothing going on in crypto. Nobody's actually using it. And you guys are actually starting to see actual people using your technology.
Exactly. Yeah.
Very interesting. And so I'm really interested in the question, because I've gone to other countries before in the developing world and tried to start businesses there. What are the particular challenges that you've faced that many people who have tried to start businesses in their own countries haven't faced?
So I would say the biggest, so Africa in general, everyone, so I'm an American, and most Americans don't understand the continent at all because it's so far away. So it's just people are very far removed. And so when they think of Africa, they think of a country, right? But it's 54 countries, hundreds of languages, a number of currencies. There's so many cultural, geographic, political, business, economic, differences in every country. And so for us as an American, something that I've always, as an entrepreneur, something I'm always very strict about is that you can't solve problems unless you really understand them and live those problems. And so I know a lot of being a fintech or crypto entrepreneur, I see a lot of companies who are we're going to save Africa, we're going to do this, and I'm going to sit in my fancy San Francisco office or London office, and you're in a totally different time zone, you don't talk to customers. So we've always said customer first. We just have to be on the ground with them every day to really understand their problems. And so that's a big difference that we, for us, that's how we stand out, I think, in the space.
And that's why you moved there.
Yes. Yeah. It was, it was one of those things where I can't preach if I'm not willing to sacrifice and do all these things. It just felt kind of weird for me not to. And you learn so much when you're on the ground, we take a very empathetic approach to building. We need to really understand the problem in order to design a solution. My co-founder and I always say we're problem entrepreneurs. We're not people who are drinking in a bar and are I have a great idea. It's no, we saw a big problem and then we wanted to understand the complexities of it. And from there, you can start building a solution.
And so before 4 years ago, had you spent much time in South Africa?
No. So we ended up, I started my career in Uganda. So I started a company in Uganda before, where I was working with subsistence farmers. So in South Africa, we live in Cape Town. So, in a big city, I pretty much live in a plane, hopping around countries throughout Africa. But earlier in my career, I was in, the bush of Africa. So rural, northern Uganda, working with subsistence farmers. Pretty much probably what most Americans think of when they think of Africa, huts and, extreme poverty. But I started working more and more with this, emerging middle-class consumer base who all live in urban areas, these college-educated professionals. That was the biggest red light for me, that these consumers who live throughout all these populated cities throughout the continent choose not to use banks, or they'll still use cash and put money under their mattress because the systems are so messed up. And that was the biggest opportunity, that people who have a choice are still deciding not to use the systems in place.
I know in Latin America and India, when I spent a lot of time there, it had a lot to do with trusts, so that they just weren't comfortable. In India, they actually have when you order something on e-commerce, they have an option that you can actually just pay in cash because nobody pays online, basically. In Latin America, there's a similar thing. It's just I don't trust this computer, this internet thing to not take my money and run away with it. Is that a similar thing there?
Oh, completely. In every country. The craziest behavior, I would say, though, is the fact that we are zero fees almost comes off initially as a scam to users, because you're that's not possible. Everyone charges fees for everything in these, every business charges really high fees. And that's what's so discouraging about these economies that like every big business makes the consumer bear the burden of their business. And it's so different for Americans in developed markets where we have infinite choice. There are so many options, from financial to healthcare to education, but in countries that don't have these legacy systems or the infrastructure, you're limited to your options, and generally it's a monopoly or an oligopoly. So they don't really know that there are potential technology solutions that can change models entirely. So trust is the number one thing you have to work on, and it can take time, but that's why we have to be on the ground to show them who we are and what we're doing.
And does that include a lot of in-person things for you, like going to events, going to startup events? How does that look for you?
Yeah, I speak a lot at, I speak a lot globally at a lot of blockchain events, just because people in the blockchain space are like, when there's an actual real use case, a company doing something, people get excited. But we, in terms of like business development, constantly going from country to country, talking to different, we're doing stuff in the energy space and the agriculture space. So the cool thing is there's a lot of enterprises and organizations who have big problems in these countries, and they've looked to us with cryptocurrency and blockchain as a way to solve those problems. So we're moving around and learning more about different industries as we're building this out.
I imagine within South Africa, there's a whole lot of cultural diversity just among that, in that country. And then when you start talking about different countries, there's huge kind of cultural gaps. What is the cultural differences like, or what are maybe an interesting story that you've had, like doing business in South Africa as opposed to doing it in Uganda or doing it in Mozambique or something like that?
So I would say that every country is very different. South Africa is an outlier in the continent because it is much more developed, though there are bubbles in the country where you have massive urban areas. It's the financial hub, so every big bank is in South Africa. A lot of foreign companies are in South Africa, and there's a lot of infrastructure and these systems in place. But then you go outside to the townships, and it's extreme poverty, and you can't imagine how certain things are operating. And then when you go to places like Zimbabwe, it's very different as well. Business moves very, very slow. There's not so much of that like hustle, like you need to get shit done, because business is done over dinner and over drinks. You got to get to know people very well. And I will say the interesting thing though is any country I go to, the first thing that I always observe is just the overall, not mindset, but like personality types of the population. And so Zimbabwe is probably the most friendly country. People are like so kind and generous, so outgoing, and want to welcome you. Uganda is very friendly, but they're all very, very soft-spoken people. It's just so interesting how you see such differences in all these different places, and you need to take that into account when you're building business to relate to these individuals.
So I was looking on the Google Play for you guys downloaded thing, and you guys had an issue in Uganda or something like that. Can you talk more about that?
Say that again.
You guys had an issue in Uganda where you guys had to like close service or shut down service for a bit.
So we didn't shut down. It was just the market. So we work with providers of electricity, of mobile service, so like data, airtime, satellite TV services, school fees. So we aggregate a ton of products and services in our app. So we have a market in the app where people can use crypto to buy these things at no cost. And the hard thing about operating in these countries is these systems are constantly down. So we have to like manage the fact that just there's blackouts sometimes, especially with the mobile network operators, the telecom companies. There'll be days where they're just like, we're blacked out, no one can use our service. And we went a few weeks with being down because of the providers we were working with were changing systems in Uganda because the Ugandan government instituted a mobile money and social media tax. So the whole country kind of went crazy It's a horrible, horrible tax because all of these consumers are getting charged even more fees now on using any type of financial inclusion tool. But so it kind of like went to chaos, but yeah, everything's fine now. But those are the problems we have to deal with in these countries.
Yeah. And those seem very stressful. Can we talk more about kind of how you deal with stress, work with stress, manage stress, or don't work with stress in your own life?
Oh, I feel like my life is always anxiety filled. So for me, so as a CEO, I'm constantly fundraising, and that's the stress that I always feel like I'm just always selling. And my co-founder, my COO is the one managing like the day-to-day operations. So he's dealing with that stress of like, oh shit, the market's down. What do we tell hundreds of thousands of users? Like they're getting really pissed off. Our support's going crazy. And so luckily, I'm in a business where my co-founder is my significant other. So I started the company and while I was living in Chicago, and we were both working at a co-working space. And he started working with me almost as like a financial consultant. And we were dating before I started the company, but we knew that there was a point when we said, okay, are you officially going to come on as my business partner? If you do, this could really stir up shit for us or the company. Yeah. And it was like the best choice we've ever made. And it's because we're both entrepreneurs. Like our life is work, our life is solving problems and building things. So that has been a massive stress reducer, I would say. Like being able to share the hard shit building these things with someone who knows what's going on is it's very helpful.
Because usually as the founder, you kind of have to keep the problems isolated from your whole team. But if you're in a significant other relationship, then that doesn't really apply.
Yeah. Exactly. No, and that's, so we'll have problems where like we're 24/7 work. We just talk about work, like all the problems we're dealing with. And it's hard to pull yourself out and say, let's have a social life right now and like turn off work and forget about it. But I think that's probably one of the reasons why so many entrepreneurs and founders deal with depression and like deep depression, just because you insulate yourself. It's not okay to talk about these things, right? Like you constantly have to have this fake it till you make it mentality of like, we're great, we're doing amazing. And in reality, this stuff is really hard, especially when you're building in Africa and you're in a new foreign continent that you're not used to.
Yep. And that I think is changing. That's part of the reason I'm doing this podcast is because for the most of the time, I don't think founders would have come on and talked publicly about their stress, but now they're starting to, which is a really cool thing because now it's kind of much more open about that we can talk about these things, that we don't have to not talk about them. Yes, there is a line where you don't kind of, when you're a founder of a company and you're talking to your employees, you don't like put the stress on them, but there is, you can kind of share some of this stuff without being seen as weak or anything like that. So have you ever dealt with culture shock? Like, can you talk more about kind of for you personally, maybe a little bit business as well, of moving to a new country and just having everything? I mean, I guess in Uganda, you would have experienced that more in the countryside because culture shock is probably much worse when you go to the countryside than when it goes to an urban environment. But can you talk more about how you kind of, or whether you actually like that experience of culture shock?
So I don't know if I ever get culture shock. So I'm Mexican and I grew up, my father is from Mexico. So I grew up constantly like traveling back and forth to Mexico City to see family. And so from a very young age, I was always like exposed to the emerging market landscape. And that's honestly why I got into entrepreneurship because, for me, it was like, how is it that I was so lucky to be born in this life? Like the chances are of me being born into this middle-class family in America are not high. Like I should be in poverty actually in Africa. So I just seeing that at a young age, it always made me want to, help and solve problems. And so I think coming to Africa, I went to Uganda for the first time. That was the first place I went to in Africa. And I went by myself and, didn't really have a way to communicate with people. My parents were freaked out. They were just like, what's going to happen? And where are you going? Like, you're going to the bush. But it wasn't culture shock. I think it was just like, yeah, I knew, you deep down, all those things are there. So it was more of like a depression. Like, I was just so sad and overwhelmed by the poverty. That was, I guess, the shock that I had. But now I actually appreciate that shock, because I think it's important, because even being in Cape Town, I'm in a bubble sometimes where I'm not like living in townships. I'm not living, in extreme poverty or poverty homes. I'm living in a very comfortable life in Cape Town. And so it's good when I'm forced to go out to do work with my customers and, in their townships, or go travel to new countries, because it exposes me to the problems and to the actual, enables me to walk in their shoes. So.
But your main customers are kind of middle class, educated people, right? Is that correct?
So those are like I would say like our early users, like smartphone users. But we're releasing a USSD, so like a feature phone solution, just because there's so many within these communities, right? There'll be this urban professional, but all their family lives back in the village, and they all use feature phones, and they need to get money back to their family, or have easy ways of moving money and saving with people. So even though we've designed this as like the smartphone solution, everyone getting smartphones will take some time. And so we want to make sure that we do service the entire socioeconomic level of consumers. And that does mean reaching consumers who are living in, rural areas and in extreme poverty.
And are you guys in Nigeria?
We're not. So we're live in Uganda, South Africa, and Zimbabwe, but our majority growth, most of it has been in Uganda.
And why are those three countries?
So Uganda, because that's where I started my career, and I knew the consumers really well. There's a massive opportunity because of the proliferation of mobile money. And for some reason, everyone goes to Kenya in this space. And Kenya, like Nairobi, is almost, I tell people, it's kind of like the San Francisco of Africa. Like, everyone builds tech solutions there, and the second you leave the city, it doesn't work, because that's not the target consumer. So Uganda is there's a massive population of consumers who are actively looking for alternative mobile financial services. It's the youngest country in the continent, one of the most educated, one of the highest unemployment rates. So there's just so much opportunity that needs to be had there. And Uganda for that reason, and then because we're based in South Africa, and Zimbabwe because of the remittance flows. So we wanted to, there's so many expats in South Africa who are from Zimbabwe, and there's just massive need to move money back to Zim. And we were, for us, we can do it instantly and at no cost. People can send money across borders, and we won't charge them anything. But Uganda just blew up for us. So as a small team, we've put all of our energy and resources in that country.
And so are you growing right now, growing your team? Are you hiring? Or?
Yeah, so we are actually hiring, not many people. I'm currently fundraising. So once we finish fundraising, we'll be hiring a number of engineers and growth people and product people.
So fundraising is a very stressful thing in itself. How is it different fundraising in crypto versus in a traditional startup?
So the crypto market's horrible right now. Yeah. So it's like, I don't know, it's interesting. So we, with Walla, we've raised equity financing for like angel investors and VCs, and then we went through accelerators. And then with Dala, it's a separate entity, we issued a cryptocurrency and did a token sale. So we had like these crypto investors. And so the interesting thing is we have, two different ways to bring in, growth funding. We have a number of crypto funds that we talk to that are really interested in the space. And then also venture capitalists that are interested in blockchain specifically. So, fundraising sucks. I do it constantly, I feel like, and that's probably the most stressful thing for startups, especially startups that are in Africa, because there's still most of the money is in the U.S., right? Most of the venture funding, most of these funds are either U.S., maybe Asia, but there's a misconception of what Africa is still. And just looking at the numbers, Africa is what China was, 5-10 years ago. It's fastest growing middle class in the world, youngest populations, income is rising. So like in the next, 5 years, these economies are going to be blowing up. And it's just difficult to really, to change mindsets because people have these preconceived perceptions of what Africa is. Like I said earlier, a lot of people are like, oh, like people in huts. Like, no, that's not what Africa is. So that's what makes fundraising when you're based in growing a business in Africa more difficult. And the funds that do exist in the continent are investing, in rands or in Ugandan shillings. So like it's pennies compared to what we could raise in the US.
Very interesting. And you mentioned China. I know it was in a different context, but I'm really interested in your personal experiences of seeing Chinese investment coming into Africa. And can you talk more about what the media portrays and how that might be different from the reality on the ground, or how it might be the same?
So there's a lot of negative perception of China coming in. One of the biggest issues is that a lot of businesses and governments and locals see that China comes in and invests, but they don't really build they don't create capital within these countries. So they hire only Chinese people. They're creating all these jobs, but they won't hire locals. So it's an unfortunate thing, right? Africa needs investment. There is a lot of opportunity there. The big investors who recognize that opportunity are China, and there aren't as many investors, PE funds, hedge funds, just you name it, that are willing to throw large amounts of money. So I don't know, it's a hard thing to adjust just because you need that money to invest in these economies and really start growing the infrastructure.
But I mean, part of the reason China is in Africa and investing in Africa, I mean, I imagine that most of it has to do with essentially colonialism, but part of it also is kind of like a goodwill thing, right? That they're trying to promote goodwill, or is that just kind of like this veneer that they're placing over this? No.
I wouldn't say goodwill thing. Like they're business people, and there are some organizations, right, that are probably doing it more as like they want to give back and invest in more of like an impact approach, but. I would say the vast majority of like oil companies and construction companies, like they're there because they see a huge opportunity to take advantage of.
And the Western world is kind of not doing any of that right now. Is it pretty much entirely?
I don't really know in terms of like, large scale like infrastructure and energy plays. Like, so we just announced a big partnership with a solar energy company in Uganda to bring a gigawatt of energy to the country, which will provide energy to over 20% of the population. So it's a huge endeavor, but they're an American company. One of the founding partners is from Uganda. And so, it's difficult. I don't operate in like, I'm in the finance and crypto space, so I don't see these large scale investments happening outside of my industry. But I assume there are a number of American companies, I would hope so, that recognize the opportunity and are starting to invest. But you see a lot of like development banks, the World Bank, the UN, USAID, like they obviously have more of a social and macro focus on driving growth in these economies, but still, a lot of them are American.
And so I want to take it back to you and your stress kind of and how you deal with it. Do you have any techniques or practices that you do on a daily basis that help you kind of manage stress, like meditation, yoga, reading, exercise?
I don't meditate at all, and it's something that I should try. I'm just like, I feel like I constantly need to move. So like sitting and being quiet is so hard for me because I have so many things going on in my head. But I am a big like athletic person, so I'm constantly working out in the mornings. Like, I used to run a lot, and then I decided to start walking. So like walking for long distance is like my therapy, especially like in Cape Town. I walk along the ocean in the morning, which really just helps me like clear my mind and gets me ideas flowing and things like that.
Very cool.
And obviously like drinking alcohol in the weekends is always a good thing.
Yeah, that's great. So what is, like, we got about 5 minutes left. What is one thing that you've come across, maybe a contrarian piece of advice that you've heard, or something that relates to helping people manage their stress or turn their stress into creativity, a book, an idea, an article, something along those lines, that our listeners might find valuable?
So say that again. What is a contrarian?
What is kind of one piece of advice or a book or something, and it may be contrarian, about how to work with stress, or something you've discovered in your own life that may not be obvious to other people?
So for me, so I'm actually just reading this book right now, called Grit, by, what's her name? Angela? Is it Angela? Duckworth. She's a professor and psychologist and microbiologist. And it was really interesting to me because it's about what makes grit. Like, is it something you can learn? Is it something you're born with? Grit are the people who will stop at nothing. And I've often found that for me, when I am the most stressed out, when I'm about to hit rock bottom, is when I perform my best. Like, it's, failure is never an option for me. So I do really well when I'm almost close to hitting, or just like when I'm really stressed out. And so I don't know, I always am about embracing the stress. Like, I don't think it's always good to avoid stress. For me, is knowing that I have a team, of 12 plus people, that I have to pay them every month, that they have kids, that they rely on me, is terrifying, but it's also something that I need to embrace and remind myself. So I actually think stress to an extent is a good thing, because it pushes me to be a better person. So I would say you should embrace stress and use it, like you said, use it for creativity, use it to push you to be better at whatever industry you're in, whatever job you're in. Because when you're in your darkest places, it's when you often learn the most, and find a part of you that you never found before.
Yeah, so it seems like two things you said there. Basically, there's not necessarily viewing stress as a bad thing and maybe turning it into a force for creative work. And then the other thing was relationship and community, and realizing that it's very difficult to live as a human being on their own, and so to have other relationships around you that you can kind of keep you honest and keep you grounded. Does that make sense? Does that? Yeah. All right.
Yeah, you can't live in it by yourself. You can never sulk in it. So whether it's your significant other, who's your business partner, or whether it's your parents, siblings, or friend, like, you have to be able to communicate those horrible, especially in entrepreneurship, like any form of entrepreneurship, having that one person that you can talk to and just tell them like how horrible of a day it was and what you're terrified about. I'm not going to be able to pay my employees this month. What the fuck am I going to do? Like, and yeah.
So what's the next big thing for Walla or Nala?
A lot. So we're actually getting ready to launch something new in the app, which I'm very excited about. So we're launching an earn feature. So it's similar to Mechanical Turk, like in Amazon, so micro tasks. So when we launched, we built out this incentives model. So we wanted to incentivize any platform enhancing behavior. So if you deposit, you get incentivized. If you transact, if you save, you invite friends, you get rewarded for these things. And through that process, we saw that consumers in these countries are willing to do anything to earn money because the employment rates are so high. People are just constantly looking for opportunity. And we saw that, especially within the financial inclusion framework, that you can't just provide these financial services, you actually have to create opportunity as well. And so we saw this as a way to create opportunity for consumers. So we're launching Earn, where to start, people can work essentially with Walla to be ambassadors and go sign up people and earn money in partnership with us. So we're democratizing the platform so that we're not the ones making money. The users are the ones making the money.
That's really interesting. So you basically created a free financial tool that incentivizes users to join the free financial tool.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
Really
yeah, you build your communities. You're the ones going out and signing up your friends. You guys all get paid, and you earn together, prosper together.
And then how do you guys make a business out of that? I apologize if that's a really simple or strange question, but how does that turn into a business?
So today we make money on transactions. So we get paid commission by these providers I was talking about. Okay. So like electricity, they pay us, but we said, rather than getting paid that commission, why can't we push some of that commission to users as well? So, one, down the road, as we scale, as we have, millions of users in the platform, and we're enabling lending, we're enabling insurance and a number of other products, there are additional revenue opportunities for us. But right now, we care more about growing. We want to spend as much money as we can, grow, get as big as we can, and the rest will follow.
Very cool. So how can people kind of follow your personal story and the story of Walla and Dala?
So you can follow me on Twitter. I'm very active there. My handle is Tricia Tita, and our company is @GetWalla. And then if you want to learn more about the company, visit the website www.getwalla.com.
Mm-hmm. That's very cool. Is Twitter popular in Africa, or is it?
It's not so much like a consumer, we don't use it for like a consumer channel. It's more just for business related purposes, but Facebook and WhatsApp are the top apps
for reaching your consumers.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So interesting. Yeah. Yeah. I got a lot more questions. Maybe we can have you on again. But thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. Yeah. And
thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Great. Thank you.